Hi everyone, and welcome to today's workshop on designing academic posters. My name is Katie Everson, and today I'll be talking to you about general tips and tricks for graphic design for academics that will help you make beautiful posters like the one shown here. And this workshop is sponsored by Icon, so thanks especially to the archaeology group at Icon for inviting me to give this talk. I'm also going to be posting this entire presentation on YouTube. So as I'm giving demonstrations on how to use different software to create an academic poster, you'll be able to pause, click on links, and generally move more slowly through those demonstrations. So first, just to introduce myself, again, my name is Katie Everson. I'm an assistant professor at Oregon State University. My research is in evolutionary biology, but I also have a keen interest in graphic design and visual communication. I've created quite a few posters like the one you see here, as well as resources for scientists and academics to be able to use graphic design tools. So one of those is my web page that has resources for designing academic posters. I also have a YouTube tutorial that introduces you to the tool that is called Adobe Illustrator, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. This is really, really useful for figure design. So that's what that YouTube video is all about. Feel free to check that one out. And then I also have sort of outside of work, one of my hobbies is designing infographics for the public sphere. So sort of taking concepts from academia and from science that are sort of misunderstood or misrepresented in the public realm and translating them so that they're more digestible for a public audience in more of a visual format. So you can see a few examples of the types of projects that I've done here. But I also truly believe that having these visual design skills can help you in all areas of your careers in academia. So figure design for manuscripts and grant proposals, designing PowerPoints for teaching, and presenting at conferences. So whether that is in an oral presentation format or a poster. Posters, for whatever reason, seem to be the thing that most academics freak out about the most. I don't know exactly what it is. I suspect that it's because a poster is such a blank canvas that it makes people feel like they have to be artistic in order to make a good poster. And while it does help to have some sort of artistic spirit when you're making a beautiful poster, you don't have to know about art. Really, all you need to know are a few basic principles of graphic design. So what I'm showing here on the right, unfortunately, is an example of a poster that didn't quite go well. A lot of mistakes are made here, including the fact that this background doesn't have enough contrast with the text that's on top of it, so you can't even really read the text in many places. It's also just too much text, so a lot of cases of a lot of text could be easily translated into something that's more icon friendly or some way to reduce that amount of text so that people aren't standing at your poster for 20 minutes just trying to read it. So ultimately what we're going for when we're making a poster is something that is not only clear, so your science or your research is represented clearly, but also is concise. You want to get straight to the point of why you are presenting this research. You want to turn heads, make sure that it is attractive enough that people actually want to stop, and then ultimately it will spark conversation so that you can have those really valuable one-on-one conversations in this conference context. And so here's an example of a poster that I actually think did a really good job. This is a poster that was published on Twitter by someone named Steve Kudos, and I think this poster is beautiful. Again, it's clear, it's concise, and it will definitely turn heads at any poster session. So I'll talk a little bit later about a few of the things that I think he did really well on this poster. But the poster that I'm actually going to walk you through today and show you specifically how I made it is this one here. And I cannot emphasize enough, this poster is completely made up. Not a single part of this poster is based on real data. I just had this idea of maybe making a poster that was completely out of my own element, not related to evolutionary biology. It's about exploring the impact of acid rain on marble sculptures. Is this a thing that people think about? I don't know. But now here's a fake poster about it. So you can see a few different elements that you might think are a little bit tricky to do, like cutting out photos or putting in small icons to represent the methods. I'm going to show you how to do all of that. And to start out, I want to talk about some of the tools of the trade that you might use to make a poster like this. So I was recently at a conference and I asked around at the poster sessions. Far and beyond, the most popular tool for poster design was Microsoft PowerPoint. It sort of surprised me because PowerPoint is not supposed to be a tool for poster design. PowerPoint is intended for slideshows. However, people often know how to use PowerPoint. They're familiar with it. They already have the program on their computers. So if it works, there's no reason you can't use PowerPoint to make a good poster. The next most popular tool was something called Adobe Illustrator. This is a software that you do have to pay for. Some institutions will have a license agreement where you can get it at free or low cost if you're a student or an employee. But usually this is a program that people have previously used if they made a lot of figures, and so they might also want to use this for making posters. Interestingly, again, this is not a software program that is intended for something like poster design. Adobe Illustrator is a vector graphic editor. It's not a poster or a layout editor, but again, it works. A very, very similar option that I also heard of some people using was called Inkscape. Exact same thing as Adobe Illustrator, but it's free. So Inkscape is another great option that allows you to lay out a poster, but mostly to manipulate vector graphics, which I'll talk about later. And then I met one person who used the software that I would recommend, which is called Adobe InDesign. Adobe InDesign is specifically for layout print design. And so examples might be, this is used by professionals who are laying out magazines and professionals who are creating posters for different brands that they work with. So you can use a software like Adobe InDesign to make your poster too. So as I'm walking through this tutorial, I'm going to be focusing on using the Adobe Creative Suite, primarily InDesign with a little bit of Illustrator and Photoshop. But I'll also demonstrate how you can do a lot of these same techniques using just basic PowerPoint. So where I always start as I'm designing an academic poster is with storyboarding. The way that I use storyboarding for my posters is that I'll physically take pen and paper and I will just create a few different options for how I want my poster to be laid out. Posters can take a lot of different sizes and shapes. They can be portrait mode, landscape. You can put the different elements of your poster in different places. And so when I was making the poster, the fake poster that I'm showing today, I played around with a few different ways that I could lay it out. And I ultimately went for the one that I have highlighted in the bottom left. And so that gives us a general place to start when we go to actually start putting the elements down using one of these computer software programs. And the first place that you have to start when you're making an academic poster is choosing a size. The most common poster sizes, probably 4 foot by 3 foot. And that could be either portrait or landscape. Note that if you are using PowerPoint, PowerPoint does have a limit of 56 inches square, so you can't make a poster any larger than that in PowerPoint. But if you're not totally sure what size poster you actually need or want to make, the first place you should start is definitely the conference instructions. I know that's probably self-explanatory, but I've pasted here some instructions from a conference that I recently attended where they specifically say that posters can be a maximum of 4 feet by 4 feet. That doesn't mean that you have to do 4 by 4, just saying that that's the maximum that you shouldn't go over. And here's an example of a poster that did go over the limitations of the push board or the push pin, the bulletin board for the conference. And you can see what happens here where, you know, it's a perfectly fine poster, but because it extends off the bottom, you can't use the push pins, the paper ends up curling around, and ultimately folks are almost having to stand on tiptoes and then crouch down in order to read the entire poster top to bottom. So I'll just briefly show you how you can set up this basic layout for a poster in Adobe InDesign and in PowerPoint. So I've just opened up Adobe InDesign, and I'm going to click the New File button. And because this is just an example poster, I don't want it to be too big. I'm going to create a poster that is 30 inches by 40 inches with 1.5 inch margins. And you can see that that poster shows up. And to do the exact same thing in Microsoft PowerPoint, we're going to go to the Design tab and go to the Page Setup area. Again, we're going to put in 30 by 40 inches. And you can see here that I also want to be able to see the ruler and the grid lines. This is a personal preference. This is basically just to make sure that I stay, again, within 1.5 inch margins that I've decided I like to have around the outsides of my poster. Okay, so now that we have our basic layout of that poster created in InDesign and PowerPoint, I'll show you how you start dropping in the main poster elements. So just as a quick example, I'm actually showing the first poster that I ever made. So this is a poster that I made for my undergraduate research project over 10 years ago. And you can see that this poster has quite a few problems, including way too much text. I don't know why I included an abstract in the upper left corner there. That's probably not necessary unless your conference requires it. But there were a few things that I did really well, even as an undergraduate. And one of those things is that I had very clean lines. I stuck to a grid that made all of these boxes are perfectly lined up with one another. And I used a good visual hierarchy. So very clear dark blue subheadings that really lay out where the reader should be progressing as they're reading this poster. And so here we can see an example of a poster that didn't do a good job of using a grid. So you can see that each of these boxes, they kind of just are floating, and they end up trapping awkward spaces in between the different boxes. And it makes it really difficult as a reader for you to know where you're supposed to look next. Usually a poster is sort of walking folks through a story, but it's hard to tell the order of the story as you're trying to read this poster. The same thing is happening in this one here. They do have large subheaders on these boxes, but it's really hard to know the specific way that you're supposed to progress through this poster. And again, the boxes are not lined up according to any sort of a grid, and so it can just look a little bit messy. So suppose that we get back into Adobe InDesign, we see this big blank slate in front of us. The first thing I'm going to do is on that left toolbar, I'm going to click on the rectangle. That's just a rectangle tool, just to draw a black area at the top of the poster where I want the title and the author information to go, and another black rectangle at the bottom of the poster where I expect the logos and some other information to go at the bottom. Then I'm going to create a text box to hold my title. Obviously, this title is way too small right now, so I'm going to bump up the font size to 150 point font. That might seem really big, but it's about right for a poster this size, at least for the main title. I'm going to move this into that black rectangle at the top, line it up with my margins, and then I'm actually going to reduce the size of the bounding box a little bit, just crop it in tighter around the text. And my poster does have a subtitle. I'm going to make that, say, 72 point font. And just for reference, 72 point font is usually about an inch tall for each letter. I'm actually not going to have this be in all caps, so let's rewrite this. Not in all caps, just because that feels a little bit aggressive. And I'll type out our subheading or subtitle for this poster. I'll change the text color to white. And again, crop it in a little closer and drag it up into that black bounding box. Okay. At this point, I also want to add another text box that's going to contain the author names. I'm going to drop the author names down to, let's say 42, yeah, 42 point font. I'll put my name and my lovely co-authors, Jane Doe and example person. And of course, our institution is Icon. And once again, crop up that bounding box to be a little tighter around the text. And so the next thing that I want to do is use this rectangular tool that has an X in it. It's different from the normal rectangle tool. The one that has an X in it is essentially a placeholder rectangle where you plan to drop a photo. So I plan to drop a photo or a figure, and you can see if I click and hold, I create a drop-down menu that allows you to create a frame for a photo or a figure that is circular instead of rectangular. But so both of those that have X's in them are where I'm going to eventually place photos. I'm now going to use the text box function again to create a subheading. I'm going to call this one Study Motivation and Goals, and I'll make it 60 point font. And once again, I'm going to crop that bounding box in close and line it up with the outside margins. And I'm going to create a few more subheaders. This one is basically my methods section. I'll be a little bit more descriptive with it and call it methods used to quantify damage to these marble sculptures that I made up. And my last section is just going to be results, and I'll put that somewhere below this photo, sort of in the middle. And I want to add in some places where I can drop smaller text, let's say maybe 36 point font text with just a few lines of information about the study motivation and goals. Remember that I am completely making up this poster, so I'm going to go to the type window and click this button that says fill with placeholder text. And what that's going to do is it's going to just make a few lines that are full of random Latin words. I actually recommend that even if you ultimately are going to be replacing those words with real text for your poster, sometimes it's nice when you're just doing the design to start with placeholder text that you can come in and fill in later. I'm now speeding up the video just a little bit so that I can quickly just show you how I am adding in a few other text boxes full of random Latin text for both the methods and the results, and I'm using bullets here. I do like using bullets on posters. I think it's a lot easier to read than full paragraphs for that setting. And finally, I'm going to use that same rectangular box with an X in it to make two places where I plan to put my graphs. So these are the results that I'm sharing with my audience, and I'll put them right here. I'm going to fiddle around a little bit with just the placement of each of these boxes and cropping everything up so that it fits a little bit neater. I'm also going to add in two text boxes that are 24 point font that are going to be the captions for my two photos. One there and one there. Then I'll also put captions underneath my figures. And once again, I'm going to fiddle around a little bit with the fit of everything to make sure that everything is breathing nicely, it's within the margins, and it's separated from the other elements. I also just want to point out that if you click on this drop-down menu, you can go into preview mode. And that shows you what your poster is going to look like without all those silly grid and outline lines. If we move on to looking at how we would do this in PowerPoint, you can see that we can use very similar tools here to create the same effects. So I'm using the Shapes tool to drop in rectangles again at the top and the bottom. I'm coloring these rectangles in black once again, just as a placeholder for now. And I'm changing this text box to hold my title. I'm going to left align that, color it white, and move that up into my black rectangle up top. Unfortunately, what's happened here is that my black rectangle was on top of the white writing. And so what you saw there was I had to change the arrangement to do something called bringing it forward. So I had to grab that text box and bring it forward. You can imagine the text box was one layer, it was stuck underneath the black bar layer. So you'll see me do it here again right now. It's underneath, but I right click and go bring to front. And now it's in front. Once again, I can right align. And at this point, I'm going to speed up the video a little bit because all I'm really doing is manipulating text boxes again. So I'm adding in some text boxes with the exact same sections that I already included in my InDesign poster, moving them to approximately the same places. And one interesting thing that I learned recently is that you can fill boxes with placeholder text, just like I did in InDesign, right within PowerPoint. So the command that you put into the text box is equals sign and then lorem, L-O-R-E-M, open parentheses, and then you put two numbers separated by a comma and close parentheses. The two numbers are the number of paragraphs that you want and the number of lines per paragraph. So for that first one, I put those two numbers, I hit enter, and it spit out some random Latin text once again. And you can see that every now and then I'll turn on those grid lines and just make sure that I'm still lined up with my margins, and I'm using the rectangle and the circle tools to create spaces where I want the pictures to ultimately go. So at this point, we've laid out the main elements of the poster. However, our poster is looking pretty black and white. And so one of the most common questions that I hear from folks when they're thinking about visual communication is how you choose a color palette that looks good. My biggest recommendation for color palettes is to try to stick to just 5 or 6 colors on the entire poster. It can be a little bit tricky, especially if you have graphs that involve a lot of different colors on them, but really try your hardest to stick to 5 or 6 because I think that makes a huge difference. You can see the 6 colors that were used in this poster here. If you use fewer than 5 or 6, your poster can end up looking pretty boring, a little bit hard to turn heads and get folks to come into the poster to talk to you if you don't use enough color. And it's also really bad to go the opposite direction. So if you have a poster that has way too many colors on it, it's quite overwhelming to look at. It looks extremely busy. So here's another example of a poster that actually did color palette pretty well. So yeah, I like the way that this poster looks in terms of the color palette that was used. You can see they used 6 colors. They're shown on the left side there. And it really creates some nice cohesion. For some reason, though, on this next poster, even though they did stick to 5 colors, it just misses the mark a little bit in terms of how those colors work together. So here's what I'm talking about. The poster, they did stick to a limited number of colors, which is always a good idea, but the colors themselves, they just don't speak to professionalism, right? So these colors are very bright. They're something that I would associate with, a storybook for kids or something like that, not necessarily for a professional academic conference. And so what I'm going to show you are a few of my favorite online tools for color selection, and then I'll show you how you can actually create a color palette in InDesign and PowerPoint and actually start dropping those colors into your poster. So the top tool that I like to use to generate color palettes is called color.adobe.com or Adobe Color. And you can see that on the very first page that you reach, there's a color wheel where you can experiment with different color palettes. Honestly, I don't find that this will always generate the most pleasing or professional color palette, But one of the tools that I do like to do is, let's say that I'm studying Stonehenge and I want to use this photo on my poster. I can import the photo directly into the website and it'll generate a color palette based on that photo so that all the elements of my poster can be really cohesive, and that photo can serve as sort of a focal point that draws together all of the colors. And you'll notice that each color is associated with a hex code. So I'll come back to that once we get into InDesign. But the other thing you can do is click on the Explore tab, and just here I'm just typing in the word professional. So I'm looking for professional looking color palettes that other people have already generated. And I really like this one. So I think I'm going to base my colors around this color palette. Because I'm connected to the Adobe Creative Suite, I can just click on Add to Library and all of those swatches will be uploaded automatically into InDesign. But you can also just click on those colors directly and copy the hex codes that we can import into InDesign. So going back to InDesign, you can see that I've already created 5 boxes. These are just literally rectangles I use using this rectangle tool. So I created boxes and I colored them according to those colors that I just generated on color.adobe.com. I'm actually going to change this gray one to be a little bit lighter. I just like to have one color in my palette that's a little light. And then I want another color in my palette to be really, really bright. I like having at least one accent color. So this is my final color palette. I'm going to use this thing called the eyedropper tool to color that top area a dark blue and my text a green. But you can see that I just made a mistake here. So I meant to color the text green, but instead I colored the text box green. So you need to switch over to that little T, which is the text color, before you use the eyedropper tool to color it green. Same here, you switch to the little T, then you can color it that bright red. I want to color these blue, but again, you see I made that mistake of coloring the box instead of the text. So I need to switch to the T and color the text blue. I think I want my captions, okay, so we'll color the bottom rectangle that same blue color. We'll color the font there, this lighter gray. Now we'll do the captions. Let's do those in the green color. So switch to the text coloring tool, color them green. And that looks pretty good. You can do pretty much the exact same thing in PowerPoint. So again, I just used this shapes tool to create 5 rectangles. I colored them with the colors that I want to be in my color palette by going to more fill colors and just typing in that hex color number directly. And believe it or not, within PowerPoint, there is an eyedropper tool. So you go again to more fill colors, click on that eyedropper, and you can select those colors just like that. But you can also see these colors popping up under my recent colors. So you can see right there, recent colors. And so instead of using the eyedropper, this is just a little bit quicker. I'll go to my recent colors and I'll color again those title components, the green. Color that with my lighter gray. And that looks like plenty for now. Okay, so our poster is already starting to look pretty good, even just with adding those splashes of color to it. But one of the other questions that I get a lot is how you choose fonts. I suggest that folks limit themselves to just 2 fonts on the entire poster. Simpler is better. If you just Google professional font combinations, you will find so many different recommendations for nice basic fonts that go really well together. So you can use one font for your headings and then a second font for the main body text and your captions, and it'll look great. Where you can go wrong is if you are using any sort of script fonts, novelty fonts, or word art. I don't mean any disrespect to Comic Sans. I think, Comic Sans apparently is actually easier for folks with dyslexia to read. I think that there's a time and a place for all of these fonts. Usually not on an academic poster though. And in fact, if you are looking for something that is dyslexic friendly, there are some resources. You can Google this for other fonts that are not Comic Sans that might look a little bit professional but are still easier to read and more accessible. I'll post also some links at the end of this talk for how you can make your design products more accessible to folks with disabilities. So opening up our poster again in Adobe InDesign, I'm just going to change the fonts to a few that I had picked out. I want my main title to be this Railway Bold. I just think it's sort of a nice mix of professional but also a little fun with that W. And then this other font called Lato is just another sans serif font, a little bit less bold. And I'm actually just going to make everything else on this poster that Lato font. Sometimes it's nice to use the same font that you use on your main title also for your subheadings. And notice that when you change the font, sometimes you have to readjust these text boxes. So that little red plus sign indicates that your text is now going over the size of the boxes. So you need to stretch those boxes out a little bit more to accommodate the fact that not all fonts are exactly the same size. I'm switching into PowerPoint now just to show you that you can do the exact same thing in PowerPoint. I actually don't have the same fonts downloaded in Microsoft, but use the same principles. So now that we have updated all of the colors and fonts and the main elements of our poster, one of the biggest gaping things that's still missing is there are these completely empty frames where I want a few photos and figures to go. So I want to talk a little bit about how you can manipulate photos for a poster. Just as an example, this is a poster that I made for a design competition at my university as a graduate student, where I was talking about my research on Tenrecs. And I used these two photos, and you can see that what I did was I cut the background out of each of them, and I think the two photos really serve as nice focal points for this poster. I do think it often comes off better if you can stick to less than 3 photos on a poster. But if you're doing research that is really based on photos, for example, old photography from the museum, let's say, is your focus, you can definitely still make a beautiful figure that has lots of photos. And on the flip side, if you are working in some field where you really don't have any photos to work with, you can still make a beautiful poster without any. So I'll teach you in one of the next sections about vector graphics and how you can use those to make a poster beautiful as well. But so I'm going to just show you really quickly how you can do this cutout effect on your posters, and also how you can crop a photo to a specific shape. So getting back into InDesign, remember that I have this really big X rectangle where I want to eventually place a photo. So what I did here was I just went to File, Place, and I selected the file that contains the photo I want to include. Notice that basically when you make that outer blue box with the X in it, you're basically creating a frame, but you still have to resize and manipulate the inner picture within that frame. And that's going to show up with an orange outline. But what I actually want to do here is, instead of having the background on this photo, I actually want to remove that dark background and have it be sort of transparent on my poster. The easiest way to do this is actually to open up Photoshop. So totally different program, but it's so easy to do. You just literally hit Remove Background, and that'll remove that entire background from your photo. You'll see a checkerboard type in the background of the photo, but that's not real. That is actually just a placeholder to let you know that that background is transparent. And make sure when you save it as a TIFF, and you check that box that says Save Transparency. And so now when you go back into InDesign and you drop that photo into that same place, the way I'm going to do this is by going to links, and I'm going to relink the photo to a different file. So I'll link it to the file that I just deleted the background from, and there it is. So you can see that now when I move around this photo, the background is transparent. So I removed that and I made it a little bit simpler. I can also now fill in this circle with a different photo. So this is going to be sort of a magnified look at the marble statue. Again, this is completely fake, but pretend that this is a magnified look at my marble statue. I can rotate it and fit it inside that frame using that same file place to initially place that photo into it. And I can do something similar in Microsoft PowerPoint. I just insert picture and I select that same picture where I already removed the background from it. I just pop it into place and resize it. Notice that I am not using these shapes as a frame this time. I'm just deleting them and replacing them later with the photo that I plan to use. So in this case, I'm going to go to picture and I'm going to select that same picture of the marble. But then I'm actually going to go to crop and crop to shape. And the shape I want to use is a circle. You can see that for some reason it made that an oval, but I can manually manipulate the crop size so that it's a perfect circle, 9 by 9. And there it is. And once again, I can rotate and manipulate and resize all of those elements. Okay, so now that we have our poster looking a little better with some photos dropped into it now, we can talk about how you can add other creative design elements. So the biggest thing that I like to do on all of my posters is include vector graphics. So anytime that I have a really big chunk of text on a poster, I try to think of how I might be able to represent that text graphically using simple icons. And you can see an example of this in the How We Did It section at the bottom. Like I said, instead of having a really text-heavy methods section, this author replaced the methods with icons that still get the same points across. And interestingly, being able to create these icons from scratch is not something that you necessarily have to do anymore. And PowerPoint actually has an amazing tool that was just implemented somewhat recently, where it's just a menu where you can find many of these icons already made and just drag and drop them directly into your poster. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Here we are in PowerPoint, and I'm just going to click on this button that says icons. It's right there. And you can immediately see that quite a few very simple icons show up. And let's say that one of the icons I want to include is for rainwater runoff. So I want to include a rain cloud. All I have to do is drop it in. I can resize it. And believe it or not, you can manipulate the colors just like it was a rectangle in Microsoft PowerPoint. So that's pretty cool and pretty easy. And one of the other things that I find a lot of folks including on their posters these days that I think is a really nice element is QR codes. So QR codes, in this case, the QR code was used to direct people towards all of the citations that were included in the poster. But I've also seen people use QR codes to link to the full paper. If a paper's been published already on the poster, they link people to the website, or if you're on the job market, you can link people directly to your CV or your resume. And having a QR code on your poster is surprisingly easy to do. I think it's easier than people think. So I'm going to quickly show you how you can do that. If you just Google QR code generator, you can see that there are so many options for generating QR codes. The one that I like to use is this one that is from Adobe. And all you need to do, let's say that I want it to link to this paper that I wrote. I just drop in the web address for that paper. It'll generate a QR code. I want it to be that bright red that'll match my poster well, and I just hit download. So at this point, all I really have to do is take that downloaded file and pop it into InDesign in the same way that I would add any other photo. So I created that little box frame, and now I just resize the photo within the frame, the photo being the QR code in this case, and I'm done. So at this point, we have dropped a QR code onto our poster, and we're ready to put the finishing touches on that poster and then to send it off to the printers and present it at a conference. So I'll show you how I made the final finishing touches on my poster. I'm not going to show you how you could do these in PowerPoint, but I've already introduced all of the necessary skills in PowerPoint for you to be able to make these changes. But I'll show you how I did them in InDesign. So here we are in Adobe InDesign again, and I actually accidentally jumped a little bit ahead. I dropped in already the two figures on the right-hand side there. All I did was drop them in just like you would a photo. I saved my two graphs as photo format and just dropped them right into the poster. I'm now also adding a couple of lines using the straight line tool and then adding a stroke around that circle just to highlight that magnified portion. And then I am exporting as a PDF. That's it. So now that we've finished and exported our poster, it's time to actually send it to the printers. And these days there are a ton of options for printers. If you're a graduate student, often your institution will have some sort of a printer on campus, either free or low cost. But if not, there are a lot of places online that'll print and turn around a poster, ship it to you relatively quickly. Or your local office supply type store might do poster printing as well. Typically, you're going to have a few options for the type of paper that you can print on. So matte paper is probably the most common choice. You can roll this up into a poster tube to bring to the conference. You can see an example here on the right of a poster that was printed on matte paper, but unfortunately, she didn't have a poster tube, and so she ended up with some creases on the poster, which is a real bummer because this poster is really, really beautiful. I think she did a great job. Just that little bit of creasing, though, can make it a little bit hard to read some of the words. Cloth posters are another great choice these days. They're a way that if you don't have a poster tube and you are traveling, print it on cloth. You can fold it into your luggage, and if you need to, you can iron out the creases with an actual clothes iron. Semi-gloss and glossy paper is one of the ones that I do stay away from just because it can create glare. You're never really sure what the lighting situation is going to be in the room. And if you want any photos of yourself standing next to your poster or presenting, you don't want to have glare in those photos. So beyond that, at this point, the only thing left to do is present the poster. I think there's some other folks later in the workshop that are going to be talking a little bit about how to actually present. My only recommendations are to treat this as an opportunity to network. Don't necessarily bog folks down with a really long speech about your poster, because sometimes people just want to come by your poster, read it, and ask you questions. Other times they might ask you for that 3 to 5 minute speech that you might have prepared. But again, see this as an opportunity to meet people, interact face to face, and really have a back and forth conversation. And so with that, I want to just talk about a few final thoughts for posters and some extra resources. So one of those extra thoughts that I want to just emphasize is that as designers, we should really be striving for accessibility in everything that we do. And what I mean by accessibility is you want as many people as possible to be able to read and understand and appreciate what you do. And if folks have disabilities, they might preclude them from being able to enjoy what you've created. But if we can just design our posters to be accessible to folks with color blindness, folks with disabilities like dyslexia, autism, visual impairment, we can get a bigger, wider audience. And we can invite people in, right? So this accessibility handbook is a great PDF resource for just generally how we can be more accessible in everything we do design-wise. There are a couple of really good articles, and I've got a nice compilation of resources that can make sure that your colors are really accessible for folks with color blindness. And my last thought is just that I hope that the skills that I've shared during the course of this workshop are going to be useful for more than just posters. So graphic design skills, like I said at the beginning of this talk, are useful in so many areas of academia. And all of these skills that I've been sharing are transferable to making presentations for your teaching and to making beautiful figures for your manuscripts and your grant proposals. So if you're interested in learning more, I found this free introduction to graphic design course. There are also graphic design courses available at many institutions. So I hope that you all check those out. And with that, I just want to say thanks again to Icon for inviting me to present on academic poster design, to the archaeology group, Riva and Reed, thank you all so much for inviting me and for everything that you've done to put this together. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the talks.